All right, so welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Let me jump into the agenda and talk about what we're going to be looking at today. So between myself and Kathleen, we'll do a little bit of the history of the fund. We'll talk about the fund strategies, the fund's capacity building program. We'll talk a little bit about the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative. We'll talk about the funding guidelines and the priorities, and then we'll do an overview of the funding programs that we have available at the fund. And then we'll talk about the cycle and eventually jump into the grant application itself. And again, feel free to pause me at any time with any questions, but we will have some time at the end as well for Q&A if we need that. So you've already met me. As I mentioned, my name is Tanya. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm the grant programs manager at the fund. I do have some of my colleagues here, and I would like to give them a second to introduce themselves. Kathleen, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Tanya. Hi, everyone. My name's Kathleen Knight, pronouns she, ella, and I'm the capacity building manager with the Fund for Santa Barbara, which is another one of our program areas here to help support the community. And just, excited to be here and see you all. I'll pass it off to Brian.
Thank you, Kathleen. My name is Brian Arismendi Villanueva. My pronouns are he, him, él, and I am the program associate at the Fund for Santa Barbara. I work in all the programs and many different facets, and I also help with a bit of the communication side at the fund. So thank you guys for being here, and I'm happy to have this evening with you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thanks, Kathleen. Brian is actually our newest addition to the team. He's still bright and shiny, and he has been a huge support to both Kathleen and myself with the programs component of the fund. On the screen, you have the rest of the team. I do want to note that Patricia, our associate director, and David, our youth making change coordinator, are based out of the Santa Maria office up in North County. And the rest of us are down here in South County. And we do have offices open. Kathleen's gonna get into that in a second, but I did want to just mention who is located where. Kathleen, do you want to talk about the office hours?
Yep. Sorry, it just took a second to get off of mute. So just to highlight, we're a countywide organization, and we do have two offices, one in North County, one in South County. This photo of us is in front of our cute little South County office. And our offices are partially open. So you can see our updated office hours here. We're always happy to have community members come by. We just ask that if you plan on making a trip to either, to call ahead just to ensure that someone will be there to welcome you. So we also wanted to just share a little bit about the history of the Fund for Santa Barbara, which can just be a bit of an important context when you are, writing a grant proposal to the fund and, considering becoming a grantee. We're a non-traditional community foundation that was founded in 1980, and we support organizations working for progressive social change in Santa Barbara County. Through our mission, the fund advances progressive change by strengthening movements for economic, environmental, political, racial, and social justice. We were founded in the post-civil rights era, and our founders were all supporters and activists of different social justice movements, like the Chicano rights movement, feminist movement, LGBTQ, and environmental movements. And through their activism, they learned that foundations almost never supported their activist-led progressive work, their politically engaged work, or work that was considered more, quote, controversial. And our founders were also aware of the systems of oppression in the world of philanthropy and conceptualized an alternative community foundation model that combated the history of traditional foundations. Next slide. So here are a few unique features about the fund. The first thing to note is that we're a fundraising nonprofit. So unlike most foundations that have a large underwriter or endowment, we fundraise the budget that we grant to the community annually. But we're very proud of the support that comes from our individual donors. We ask a lot of questions when taking private dollars, and we expect donors to walk their talk so that there aren't any strings attached to the dollars that we receive and give out. To us, fundraising is organizing, and this helps keeps us in tune with the organizations we support. For this reason, we doubled our grants during the 2007 recession and tripled our emerging needs grants in 2020 at the start of the pandemic. The second thing to note is that we are unabashedly progressive. We do not pretend to be neutral, and our motto is change, not charity. We understand that social conditions improve most dramatically when those who have been denied power and justice lead on their own behalf to confront, challenge, and change the conditions that have denied them access to justice and equity. Our mission is directly looking to support social change projects that address the root causes of inequities and the underlying conditions that bring them about. If this is unclear at the moment, don't worry. We'll speak more on this later throughout the presentation. Lastly, another unique feature of the fund is our activist-led decision-making model. And these are the people that are in charge of making our funding decisions, which Tanya will share more about.
Yep, that's right. So the fund is the only foundation in Santa Barbara County that uses a participatory decision-making model. The final funding recommendations are selected solely by the grant-making committee, and this means that fund staff like myself or Kathleen don't have the authority to make grants, but it allows us to be able to provide technical support to applicants such as yourselves. And we hope that applicants think of staff as an ally in your approach to the grant-making committee. The grant-making committee is an inspiring group of volunteers with deep roots in our communities. They represent the entire region from North County all the way to South County and everything in between. They are community activists who are on the ground doing the work and really understand the of, by, and for approach to supporting historically marginalized community members. They have a range of expertise on issues that affect our communities, and they bring their unique insights to the deliberation process. Most importantly, they are your audience when writing a proposal to the fund. Each application we receive is read by at least 15 people, and we believe that knowing your audience when writing your proposal is an important part of writing a successful proposal. We also, on the screen, you have the names of the current grant-making committee members. Just remember, these folks are the people who are your audience when you're writing a proposal to the fund, and we do have more information available about each of them on our website. Brian is going to drop the link to that on the chat. If you'd like to learn more about them, read their bios, you can do so on our website. I'm going to hand it back to Kathleen real quick to talk about the strategies at the fund.
Thanks, Tanya. So we employ 5 key strategies here at the Fund for Santa Barbara. Our first, which is grant making and what we're best known for, and it's probably why you're here today, but there are other ways that we support groups aside from funding. One of these ways includes building capacity of progressive organizations to help them be bold and effective. This is really any non-monetary resource that nonprofits might need. We host workshops and convenings, funders briefings, and host a lunchtime activist group. And we also offer things like direct consulting and an online community calendar where you can promote upcoming events. We have information libraries with books on best practices and other topics, as well as physical resources that you're welcome to borrow. We also nurture coalitions by being a hub for convening collaborative efforts and serving as a trusted table to convene people and groups for strategy, resource sharing, and inspiration. This includes the Central Coast Immigrant Rights Coalition or the Economic Justice Working Group. We also work to influence philanthropy, and we advocate for more progressive approaches to philanthropy to support community organization and movement building. This looks like unrestricted funding, access to resources for grassroots-led work, and advocating for greater flexibility within fundraising. We like to think of this as growing the pie rather than creating more slices. We also look to leadership development so that social justice movements in the progressive philanthropy sector look like the communities we serve: diverse, intergenerational, and values-driven. From our Youth Making Change program to our internship program, the GMC, our board of directors, and our staff were all involved in this leadership development. Next slide. And I also want to take a moment to share with you more about our capacity building program. We have a variety of program workshop offerings, and currently we're hosting Preparing and Responding to Opposition Attacks, which is a hands-on crisis management webinar series to help organizations prepare and plan in the case of right-wing supremacist attacks. You can find more information, register on our website. We also have a variety of resources and recordings on the fund's website, and also partner with the nonprofit resource network to share sector-wide resources, which may be helpful for you. We also offer free one-on-one technical assistant and consulting services, which you can feel free to reach out and book some time with me. Brian will share the link to my Calendly in the chat. And we also host an online informal lunchtime activist meeting, which is a monthly convening space for local activists and community members working for social change and justice, to be a part of a free-flowing space to share their work, seek resources and support, and engage with advocacy work. We meet the last Thursday of the month from 12 to 1:30 p.m. via Zoom, and you can send me an email if you're interested in joining. Next slide. We're also working collectively to advance equity in the Central Coast through the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative, and encourage you to leverage this community data project in your grant proposal to the fund. This effort is informed by community-based research to look at intersectional inequity in our region. Their findings are presented in the full study, as well as in issue area specific mini reports and digestible infographics, all community resource tools available to you on our website. We really encourage you to engage with the report and utilize the data to your advantage, to leverage funding as a resource and in connections to your own work to help you fulfill your mission. We'll also be hosting some training opportunities this summer, so stay tuned. You can find more out about this on our website. And I also really encourage you to please schedule one-on-one time with me. I'll help you go through your grant proposal to the fund and can help you pull information and data from the report that can help strengthen your proposal and increase your chances of being funded.
Yeah, I also encourage folks to take advantage of the offerings of Kathleen's time to learn more about the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative and really bolster your proposals as you're drafting those to the fund. We'll go ahead and shift gears now and start diving into the funding programs that we have available. So the first is the single year general grant program, which is why you're here tonight. It's offered in the spring and in the fall, and currently we are entering the spring cycle. The maximum request for that is $10,000 and the length of funding is 12 months. We also offer a multi-year grant that is typically offered in the fall, and the maximum request for that is $30,000 for 3 years with a disbursement of $10,000 each year. And then we have an emerging needs grant that is available for unforeseen circumstances, and the maximum amount request is $5,000. And the other program we have available, especially for those of you who may have youth programming in your organizations, is the Youth Making Change funding program. And that we have 2 boards, one in North County, one in South County, each give up to $15,000. The maximum request is $3,000 for that, and it's specifically for youth-led projects. I highly encourage you to keep this grant opportunity in mind if your organization has a youth component. And that funding is typically offered in the fall. I believe the request for proposals opens in August. We have 2 other new programs that I wanted to briefly share with you. The first is the Racial Equity Fund of the County of Santa Barbara, which is offered in collaboration with the county. The maximum request for that is up to $100,000 for up to 3 years. And this funding program is available specifically to organizations or groups that address anti-racism through systems change strategies. At this point, new initiatives will not be considered, so this work has to be already ongoing within your organization. And the deadline for this program recently passed, so just stay tuned for the grantee announcements coming in the spring. And then the other program that we have available that is new is the Nikki Flack Social Housing Fund program. This is for organizations or groups advocating for and actively leading social housing justice campaigns in Santa Barbara County. There are 4 different funding categories that groups can apply under, and it is open year-round until funds are exhausted. If groups are interested in applying, they are subject to an initial screening by fund staff. If you would like to learn more about this, please reach out to me. Brian will drop the grants email in the chat, and I can definitely answer any questions pertaining to either of these 2 programs. And then briefly here, before I move forward, I did want to encourage you both, if you aren't already registered on our listserv to go ahead and sign up so that you don't miss any future funding opportunities that may become available with the fund. And Brian will be dropping the link in the chat to sign up for our listserv. And then for any and all of our funding programs, all applicants must meet the funding guidelines and priorities. And in order to talk about the funding guidelines and priorities, we want to talk about what is social change specifically as it pertains to the fund. And I'm going to hand it off to Kathleen to talk about that.
Thanks, Tanya. So you've heard us mention a few times now that our mission is to support requests with a strong social change or systems change component. So what does this mean? Well, at the fund, we define social change as change that addresses the systemic root causes of social inequalities in an effort to alleviate those inequalities, but also the underlying conditions and circumstances that cause and sustain them. And this can be social inequalities in the realm of economic, environmental, political, racial inequalities. Projects with a strong social change component will be working to change the set of conditions that keep societal issues in place. Typically, we think of this in contrast to charity or direct service projects that provide a service without addressing the root cause of these issues. So for some context, you can think about the work that a food bank does versus advocacy for a living wage ordinance so that people can actually afford to purchase their own food. Or offering music lessons versus lobbying the school board to allocate money and institutionalize a music program for all students. Or something like offering childcare versus lobbying electeds for affordable childcare programs. It's not that we have something against direct service. We think direct service is absolutely critical and important. But you'll recall that our founders were looking to fund work that was typically overlooked by other foundations and lacked access to funding. The reason that we don't fund direct service work is that most other foundations do. And if you have a direct service model project, then the fund may not be a good fit. We encourage you to connect with us if you're unsure whether or not your project is a good fit. That said, we know there is no black and white line about what constitutes direct service versus social change. And sometimes the most basic charity work is actually a social change idea, depending on what else is happening in the community. And there's work we support in Santa Maria that we wouldn't support in Santa Barbara. All that to say, context is everything. And I'll hand it back over to Tanya to talk about the funding guidelines.
Thanks, Kathleen. So on the screen, you have our funding guidelines that, as I mentioned, all applicants must meet in order to apply for funding from the fund. You'll notice that these tie back to our mission to support progressive social change work that addresses the root causes of social inequities. We were very intentional in the language we chose to highlight the type of work that we support. And you'll want to make sure that you familiarize yourself with the guidelines and make sure that your project addresses or aligns with at least one. They are available on our website, and you will see them repeatedly addressed throughout the application process. So we invite applications from organizations that actively support anti-discrimination based on race, sex, gender, age, religion, language spoken, or immigrant status. I do want to note this list is not exhaustive. We invite applications from organizations supporting any anti-discrimination work. Social justice issues are not monolithic, and we encourage proposals that are intersectional and inclusive. Actively support communities marginalized by power structures to engage in dialogue and actions that seek to counter social injustice. Examples of this are trainings for parents, youth, and farm workers on how to realize their power to affect change on issues that directly affect them, for example. The next is actively work to improve the rights of workers and their families whose living conditions have been marginalized. Also promote the cultural life of underserved communities and support the activities of cultural workers. Many times underserved communities are misconstrued as joyless, and we all know that this could not be further from the truth. Communities that are underserved are filled with joy, and they do thrive in many ways. Supporting groups that bring light to the joy and richness of these communities is an essential part of the work that the fund does. Examples include the Guelaguetza group in Santa Maria, Juneteenth in Santa Barbara, and MLK Celebration Committee in Lompoc. I also want to highlight the last part of that to support the activities of cultural workers and note that we encourage folks to honor cultural workers, artists, musicians, etc., by paying them for their work. We invite proposals from projects that promote self-determination and leadership development in low-income and disenfranchised communities. We are committed to removing barriers and providing support to folks with lived experiences and centering the people that are most affected. The next is promote global peace and organize locally for just policies. This includes educating and creating an awareness of how global and national issues affect our communities locally. Examples of current issues include women's reproductive rights, climate change, and gun control. We invite proposals from organizations that work on building coalitions to enhance improving environmental justice and address climate change, especially organizing a constituency usually without access to decision makers. Engage in collaborative action and coalition building to strengthen movement ecosystems is another one of our guidelines that we invite proposals from. And this, we believe that a key component of real change is movement building, and we strongly support coalition work and cross-movement solidarity. And while we do encourage folks to work together, we're not prescriptive about it. We're not saying you have to be working together or collaborating or involved in coalition work. But again, we do believe that strong movement building work is supported by this work. And if you are engaging in this work, then we'd love to hear about it. And the last two, work against community violence and actively support recovery and restorative justice activities and initiatives. And finally, we invite proposals from organizations that operate in a democratic manner, responsive to and directed by the constituency being served. So this to us means that the folks directly impacted by the injustices should be involved in the strategy and program development and have decision-making capacity. The key here is that we want to support constituency-led work, and this can include senior management, staff, committees, etc. And Kathleen will go over the funding priorities next.
Thanks, Tanya. So the grant making committee uses the funding priorities to drive their proposal review and base their assessment about funding projects. They're in alignment with the values of the fund and help guide the deliberation process. The guidelines are part of the priorities that they take into consideration. And this includes asking questions like, does the project have the potential to create or advance social, economic, political, and/or environmental change? Remember, we're a movement building foundation and our guidelines hold our values at their core. And so we always ask, or the grant making committee always asks, does it align with the fund's values? Next, they pay special attention to whether there are elements of community organizing, lobbying, direct action, base building, coalition building, or legal strategy. They want to know, does the project address the root causes of the issue? The GMC also considers access to funding. Does this project lack access to traditional funding? Would the project go forward without the support from the fund? Given our social change rooted agenda, the GMC prioritizes groups that lack access to more traditional sources of funding, or that use strategies that are typically overlooked by mainstream philanthropy, like legal strategies, lobbying, direct actions, the policy and advocacy type work. We're really intentional about supporting grassroots organizations, groups that address anti-racism as part of their mission, and organizations that aren't necessarily at the top of the list for getting funding. The GMC asks themselves, what is the funding trend for this type of work? An example of this is DEI initiatives. Prior to 2020, DEI initiatives were not as popular as they are today. Nowadays, there's significant funding available from other philanthropists, and we would likely refer you to seek funding from other foundations if you came to us with this type of request. The grant making committee also considers the critical timing and need, asking, does the organization have the capacity to reach its social change goals? Are the key players familiar with other organizations in the same field to further the goal of movement building? And they also consider impact of funds. How clear is the budget outline? How well does the budget support the project's social change goals? Will funding help start up the organization, stabilize the organization, and/or leverage other funding sources? They also consider regional equity. Will this project help the GMC achieve its objective of providing equity and funding throughout Santa Barbara County? The key is to remember that we support projects with a strong social change component, which I shared a bit about earlier.
Thanks, Kathleen. And finally, this is what we do not fund. So we do not fund political campaigns that support a candidate or a political party. However, we do typically fund C3s and C4s lobbying or advocating for ballot measures with the exception of ARIA funding. And also, I want to uplift that every 2 years, we offer a nonprofit advocacy and lobbying training in collaboration with Alliance for Justice to encourage ballot measure advocacy from our nonprofit partners. We do not fund private interests. We do not fund direct labor organizing, direct support to individuals, building improvements, capital ventures such as machines, vehicles, etc., office equipment like laptops, and projects located outside of Santa Barbara County. And in addition to meeting the funding guidelines and priorities, applicants must meet the general eligibility criteria, which includes, of course, that they must meet the funding guidelines, have a social change component. Also, folks who are seeking funding from us must have a tax ID number or an employer identification number. And just to clarify, a tax ID number if your organization has C3 or C4 status, or if you are applying with a fiscal sponsor, and an employer identification number if you are applying as an unincorporated group. Similarly, groups must have an organizational bank account or that of a fiscal sponsors, because grant checks will not be made out to individuals. And typically, organizations seeking funding must not be currently funded by the fund. We have made some exceptions, which include the Racial Equity Fund, the Mickey Flack Social Housing Fund, and the Emerging Needs Grant. And then finally, the budget and the planned activities must fall within the 12-month funding period. So for example, the spring cycle, the funding is dispersed in June. So theoretically, your budget and your planned activities that you want the grant to pay for should fall within June 2023 and June 2024. And then I did want to quickly highlight that you can find an extensive list of all of the projects that we have funded in recent history on our website. And this can hopefully give you an idea of the type of projects that we do support and help you understand more about the types of requests that fit the fund's funding guidelines. And Brian's going to drop the link in the chat to that so you can learn more about our recent grantees. And we'll go ahead and switch gears and dive into the spring cycle now. And the way that I want to start diving into the spring cycle is to give you an overview of the cycle timeline, to give you an idea of where we are and where we're headed. So the request for proposals opened last week. This week, we're having the 3 grant application workshops. This is the second, and welcome and thank you for joining us. And then we do offer an optional pre-application review deadline. And Kathleen's actually going to share a little bit more about that in a second, but I wanted to flag it for you that the deadline for that is going to be February 21st, which is a Tuesday. The 20th is a holiday, and it's at 5 p.m. via email. And then the proposal deadline is going to be February 27th, which is a Monday, and the deadline to submit is going to be at 11:59 p.m. I really want to stress 11:59 p.m. If you're trying to submit at 12 a.m., you will be submitting too late and the application will automatically have closed by then. If you can submit before the 27th or before 11:59 p.m., I highly encourage you to do so. And then after that, between March 29th and April 26th, the grant making committee members will be conducting site visits. Not all applicants will receive site visits, but if you do, the grant making committee members will reach out to you directly, and I'll have more information about that in a second as well. And then grantees will be announced at the end of May. And then the grant award celebration is going to be taking place on June 14th in South County, so in Santa Barbara. And this is a community event that is open to all community members, regardless of whether or not you are receiving funding. So I want you to encourage you to put that in your calendars and tell your friends and join us as we celebrate the spring grantees. And then Further down the line, if you are selected for a grant for the spring 2023 cycle, then there will be two grant reports that will be due. One will be a progress report due at the 6-month mark in December, and then a final report due June 2024. And as I mentioned, Kathleen's going to share more about the optional proposal review.
So what is the optional proposal review? The fund offers an optional pre-application review for prospective applicants. And what that is an opportunity to have fund staff members review your proposed project and share some feedback that may be useful in filling out your proposal. What you'll need to submit is a 1-page maximum summary of your proposed project, which details what you're trying to accomplish, a list of key organizers and participants, a draft of your budget, and we ask that you submit this via email by 5 p.m. on February 21st to grants@fundforsantabarbara.org. We really encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity if you're having trouble determining whether your project meets the fund's guidelines and is a good fit for the fund.
Right. And this is actually in complement to the other opportunity that Kathleen shared earlier about just having one-on-one technical assistance about with drafting your proposal and whatnot. So both good opportunities and both highly encouraged to take advantage of. And so as you saw on the timeline, the site visits are part of our cycle that happen later in the process. And during the first screening meeting, the grant making committee members determine who will be receiving a site visit. And if your project is selected for a site visit, then the grant making committee members will contact you directly to set it up. And site visit teams typically have 2 grant making committee members and 1 fund staff member for support. And they'll ask to meet with 3 to 4 members of your organization of your choice. The term site visit can be a little bit misleading. You do not need to have a physical site. The site visit is more of an informal interview for the grant making committee members to learn more about your project in your own words. And especially with obviously the recent pandemic, we have taken to doing some of these on Zoom if that's easier for folks. We can also provide a community room if folks don't have a site but would like to meet in person. This is all very flexible, so you can let the grant making committee members know what your preferred mode of meeting is, and you can also reach out to me if you need support finding a community space to meet at. And then, as I mentioned, just note that not all applicants will be invited to participate in a site visit. And I'm about to jump into the application itself, but before I do, I want to highlight very quickly our grants portal, which is submittable. We do have an entirely electronic grant process, and you can find the link to apply on the Grantee Portal on the fund's website, which is where you found the registration link for tonight's workshop. From there, you will be redirected to our online grant application portal to start your application. And in order to apply, you will need to create a free submittable account. And I encourage you to use the email address that is linked to the organization that you're submitting the grant for. This email will also be used as our primary point of contact with you. So use an email that you check regularly. And our grants platform works best on Google Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. Unfortunately, Internet Explorer is not supported at this time, so just please keep that in mind. And since going entirely electronic, there have been some benefits that I want to uplift. One of them is that you are able to invite collaborators to support you as you are drafting your proposal, and you can invite as many collaborators as you want, and I will show you where in the application to do that, but that's something to keep in mind. And then the other is that there is an autosave feature that allows you to save drafts and come back to them whenever you want. I will say that with the caveat that with the bigger portions of text, I still encourage folks to work offline on a separate Word document, just because once in a while, there will be some technical difficulties that come up, and I would hate for folks to lose their work. So if you can and are able to, then I encourage you to write your longer application narratives on a separate Word doc and then just copy and paste them over. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that if you do find the application to not be accessible to your needs in any way, shape, or form, and would like either technical assistance or support with figuring out an alternative to doing this, then please contact me, grants@fundforsantabarbara.org, and I will be happy to troubleshoot with you and or connect you with customer service submittables if that is something that is needed. Let me go ahead and jump into the application now. And so I like to show here, this is our landing page of our website. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And then Grantee Portal is where I mentioned the application lives. So Grantee Portal you get here by clicking on this button on the top menu bar. You scroll down, and then here is where you are able to select the application process. Additionally, we have the timelines that I went over with you available for download, and then obviously where you registered to attend tonight's workshop. So I've now been redirected to the funds submittable portal to apply. I will say that if you are not logged in when you're redirected, it'll prompt you to log in before moving forward. I've already been logged in, so this is the landing page that I get. Again, you'll see the funds, funding guidelines and priorities, our mission, a little bit about us. And then if you keep scrolling down at the bottom is where you'll see any funding opportunities that we currently have available. And you can go ahead and select apply. Once you do that, this is what the application looks like. As I mentioned, there are some things I wanted to highlight. The first was the manage collaborators button. Here is where you can go ahead and invite collaborators from your organization to join you in drafting your proposal, with the caveat that only the person who creates the original draft is the person who is able to submit. Any of the collaborators will not be able to submit the original draft. So just please keep that in mind as you're determining who should create the original draft of the application. And then you'll notice that we have the grant period as well as the funding length here for you. And then we have a link that takes you back to our website to review the funding guidelines and priorities if you need to do that. And then we have a link available as well to download an application checklist. And the application checklist is a tool that you can use to ensure that you submit a complete application and prepare to gather any documents that you may need in order to submit your application. The other thing that I wanted to make sure that I highlight is that there are clues scattered throughout the application. For example, this red asterisk means that the question is required. Some questions that are not required will not have the red asterisk, but anytime you see the red asterisk, that's what that will mean. Then some have word limits. The word limits will always be on the bottom right hand corner of the text box, so that you can take a look at that. And then finally, I've also added some specific clues underneath the question themselves to help guide and really coax out what it is that we are looking to gather with the question, and or just provide clues. For example, here, this is a summary that we asked for, and I asked for it in 4 parts, but we want it to be written in third-person present tense paragraph form, and I'll explain why that is in a second. And so the clue here will tell you not to draft a number or a dot list. So this first section, which I've already kind of jumped into, is the general information section, and this covers the basics of the organization and the project. And this first question specifically asks you for a third-person narrative summary. And why that is? Well, that's because the grant making committee will have access to the entire application. But this brief summary is what we will be sharing with our board of directors. And we don't edit it in any way, shape, or form. We want the board of directors to see the summary in your own words, and this is why we ask for this summary here. And the only thing I'll say is be sure to only answer the 4 prompts that are being asked. Moving down, we ask for contact information. This submitter contact information should match the submitter contact information of the person who created the original draft of the application. So again, that person who is then inviting the collaborators to come in, this information should match that person's information. And then we'll get into the organization information, name of organization. There's a clue here to enter it as it is listed in the IRS exempt organization list. The only time you wouldn't do this is if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor or as unincorporated and you're not listed in the IRS exempt organization list. In that case, you would just add the name that you typically use in community or in your dealings so that we can identify you. And then we'll ask for a project name. You can give your request a name, any name that you'd like. And you don't have to get super creative. If you're applying for general operating support, then you can say general operating support for X organization. It doesn't have to be a long or a tedious name. And then we'll ask if your organization has tax exempt status, 501c3 or 501c4. If you do, then you'll say yes, and then you'll tell us which it is, either 501c3 or 501c4. If you do not, you can say no, and then we'll ask if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor. If you say yes, then we'll ask for your fiscal sponsor's tax exempt status. And if you do not have tax exempt status and are not applying with a fiscal sponsor, then you'll say no, and then you'll get the option to apply as unincorporated. And then if you are applying as unincorporated, then we'll ask you to give us your employer identification number. And then we'll also further down in the application ask for a statement of charitable purpose. Moving on, we get into organization address. This is your organization address for theoretically where you are located. However, if this is not where you receive correspondence, then we'll also ask to give us where you receive correspondence. If you do receive correspondence at this organization address, you can mark yes and move on. If you do not, you can say no, and then we'll ask you for your organization mailing address, which can be separate from time to time if you have a PO box or something of that sort. And then if you are applying with a fiscal sponsor, we'll also ask you for your fiscal sponsor's address. And then we'll ask you for your organization's phone number, website, and social media handle. Note that neither one of these two has a red asterisk, and that means that it is not required. But if you do have an organization website or a social media handle, we encourage you to share that with us so that the grant making committee has a better understanding of your organization and the work that you do. And then we'll ask about who the check should be made out to. As I mentioned earlier, checks must be made out to organizational bank accounts. If you are applying with a fiscal sponsor, then your fiscal sponsor's name will go here as opposed to yours. And then similarly, if you are applying with a fiscal sponsor, then the organization bank account and financial institution will be your fiscal sponsors and not your own. Moving down to the request information, the first will be to provide a brief summary in 25 words or less to tell us what the funds will be used for specifically. This isn't a long summary like the one that we ask for the board. This is specific to the nitty-gritty. What exactly is the request that you are seeking funding for? And then the amount that you're requesting, again, the maximum amount is $10,000. I believe that if you attempt to put anything over $10,000, it'll ask you to change that. And then just the understanding that the funds must be expended within that 12-month funding period, which again for spring is going to be June 2023 to June 2024. And then the type of request that you're requesting, whether that's general operating support or a specific program or project. And then we'll ask you if the request has received funding from the fund in the past. If it has, great, let us know more about that. And if it has not, just select no and move on. And then the total request budget will be in reference to this request. So if it's for a specific program or project, then this total request budget will be your program or project's funding or budget. Sorry, not funding. And then if you are applying for general operating support, then this total request budget will match your total organizational budget as they are one and the same. And then your request budget period start, and then your request budget period end. Again, total organizational budget is for your organization, not your fiscal sponsors. And then the fiscal year start, whether that is in July or January, we'll ask for that there. And then moving a little bit further down, we'll ask about the specific issue areas that will be addressed with this request. We have an extensive list here, but if you are not seeing specifically the issue areas that you aim to be working with, then you can go ahead and select other down here and then tell us what your issue areas that you are addressing will be. And then the request specific strategies. These are strategies that you plan to employ with this request. If you do not see the strategies that you are going to be employing here, you can go ahead and select other. And again, just tell us what they are in the pop-up box. And then the constituency, similarly, tell us what constituency your request will be working with. And finally, your geography that this request will be targeting. If you are working in countywide, then go ahead and select countywide and move on. However, if you are working in a specific area of the county, such as South County, you can select South County, and then you can tell us where exactly in South County you will be carrying out your work. And then we will ask about site visit information. If the submitter is the person that should be contacted for site visits, you'll go ahead and click yes and move on. However, if not, for example, if you have a grant writer, but you are not the program manager and the program manager is a better person to be contacted, then you can select no, and then tell us who to contact for that site visit. And then the best days and times for site visit interviews. Please note that our grant making committee is composed of volunteer activists who have day jobs as the rest of us do. And we do ask that you provide at least 1 or 2 evening options in addition to daytime options. And again, just remember that these interviews are for the grant making committee to learn more about your proposal directly from you in your own words. And then we are now at the application narrative. We're about halfway through the application. This is those longer text answers that I was talking about that I recommended working on a separate Word doc. The first is, or actually before I get into them, I wanted to note that for the application narrative portions, we encourage you to focus on the specific questions that are being asked and draft succinct answers. I encourage you to break down the questions and specifically answer what is being, what the question is trying to gather, and don't get lost in the weeds. Remember that the grant making committee have to read all the applications, and you do not want them to have to sift through fluff words. You want them to be able to articulate why they support your request, so that so you can be clear and concise. And then one thing that I will also mention is that for best practices, avoid using acronyms. Okay, so the first question asks you to outline your proposal, describe your request history, purpose, and objectives, and your specific request to the fund. Here is your opportunity to give us all the background information and lay out the foundation for your request. And then summarize how the project came to be and what your specific request is. And also make sure that you really understand the guidelines and the priority when we talk about the strategies you are employing or plan to employ with this request. And I will highlight again to reach out to Kathleen. Brian, can you put her CD email in the chat? Reach out to Kathleen to get support with this. Next question is asking you to keep in mind the fund's priorities as stated in the guidelines, and tell us how this request is social change rather than traditional charity or direct service. Remember, with our funding guidelines, we are looking to support projects with a strong social change component. So here you'll want to connect the dots between the social change component of your project and how you are addressing the root causes of social inequities. Remember, we're looking for systems change relating to the root causes of issues affecting our communities. And I highly encourage you to be explicit about how this request is promoting social change. The grant making committee members will prioritize projects that address systems change, as it is uplifted in our funding guidelines and priorities. Then we will ask you to describe how the request is enhancing community capacity to build and mobilize power and addressing the root causes of issues. And again, the grant making committee members will prioritize projects that promote movement building and coalition building. They'll ask whether you're working to bridge the gap between silos and working together with other groups. We want to see how you're partnering with other organizations doing similar work. And this question is asking you to show that you know the community. And, be transparent. If you're not working with others, that's okay. Again, we're not being prescriptive. We're not saying you have to be working together. We're not saying you have to be engaging in coalition work. But if you are, then tell us about it. Tell us how that is taking place. And if you're not, then tell us what are the challenges that are keeping you from working with others. Maybe other players in the field that are promoting similar work have different priorities, or their missions are different from yours. If you are working with other community partners, we'll ask you to name those community partners and how it is that you are working with them. So for example, if you are collaborating, then you can click on collaborating and then tell us who you're collaborating with. And then we will ask you to describe your organizational structure and governance, and how are decisions made and priorities set for your group, and how your constituency is involved in the decision-making process. Again, we covered earlier that we are looking to support constituency-led work. At the fund, we understand that social conditions improve most dramatically when those who have been denied power and justice lead on their own behalf to confront, challenge, and change the conditions that have denied them access to justice and equity, and talk about how involved your constituency is in the decision-making process and how they affect the work that you do. The grant-making committee will want to know whether this is a top-down project or if you are engaging the constituency and incorporating their voice in the process. And again, the grant-making committee members will prioritize projects with community buy-in and partnerships where the constituency is part of the decision-making group. They will ask you for 2 references, and this is any 2 folks who understand your project and can speak to it. A little bit further down, we get into the activity timeline. Again, this is from June 2023 to June 2024. Because the fund doesn't fund retroactively. However, if there are activities that are being done prior to you receiving the grant, you can definitely list them here fully with the knowledge that we wouldn't be able to pay for them. But if you want to give us a holistic picture of the work that you're doing, then you're welcome to list those activities here. And then a good way to differentiate between these is objective is what you're going to do or hope to accomplish, and the activity is how you're going to do it. The activities should help you achieve your objectives, and the activities and objectives should support the narrative of the proposal. As you're completing your timeline, you should also be thinking about your budget. And I encourage you to work on these together and connect the dots between the two. As you're identifying your activities, think about how much each activity will cost so that it leads directly into your budget. And I'll go over this in more detail in a moment, but for now, remember that your budget is your activities in another form, really. We'll ask you what the anticipated outcomes are and how you will evaluate the effectiveness of the impact of the request. For this question, think about what is going to be different by virtue of you carrying out this request. What is the change that you seek to make, and how you will evaluate, and how will you evaluate it, whether the change took place? What is going to be different in your organization or in your constituency or in your community by virtue of you carrying out this project? Applicants get to set their own determinants of success. Evaluation can be very simple. It does not have to be elaborate. Any pre and post information is helpful to give us an idea of the shift that you expect to see. We understand that outcomes look different for each request, and we want you to tell us what they look like to you. These can be general goals. Again, they don't have to be very elaborate. And then how will the request, benefits, outcomes strengthen your organization's mission? Talk about how this project relates to the overall goals of the organization. Articulate how it relates to your organization's mission and connect the dots for the grant making committee members. The project does not have to be ongoing, but if it is, tell us how you plan to keep the benefits ongoing. And then we'll get into the financial information section. The first question will ask you to identify the major fundraising strategies of your organization for this request. And then just as a note, a strategy is a specific plan of action to raise funds for the request. And the activities are the specific ways in which the strategies are being carried out. Just a small differentiation there for you all. And then we'll ask, what resources aside from funding does your organization have access to? And what resources aside from funding does your organization need? Here, tell us what resources you have access to and what you are lacking. Here you can really flex your muscle in terms of what kind of community buy-in does your request have. For example, does your board participate in your work? Who are the advocates and supporters of this request in your community? It doesn't have to be monetary support. This can be in-kind donations, like maybe a constituent is lending you their garage to host house meetings, for example. Again, this is your opportunity to flex your muscle on how you've been resourceful and creative and how the community is supporting the work that you're doing. And then also tell us the resources that you need. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can address all the needs that you have, but I will tell you that this is something that Kathleen looks at when she is going through and planning out what kind of capacity building and technical assistance support we put out from the fund. So be very transparent with us. Let us know what kind of trainings or what kind of information is lacking and there's a need for, and Kathleen can certainly take a look at those and start addressing them. We also use these to talk to other foundations and let them know what our constituents are in need of. So we use this to advocate on your behalf as well. And then, since I mentioned Kathleen, if you have any specific technical assistant needs, you can always reach out to her directly to get personalized support. And I think her email is already in the chat. It's cb@fundforsantabarbara.org. And this is the financial information budget table. Again, it's from June 2023 to June 2024, which is when we make funding available. I've already started doing a pre-filled out sample here, but let me go ahead and talk a little bit more about that. Very quickly, I did want to note that this table will never refer to your fiscal sponsor's budget. This is specifically for your request. And then remember when I said that your activity timeline should correlate to your budget? This is where you translate your activities into dollars. And I recommend keeping a running sheet as you're identifying the activities you plan to do, and think about the specifics of what you're going to need and how much it's going to cost you, like personnel, supplies, etc. The table is divided into two parts. The first section is the income section, and the second section will be where you add your expenses. The table is set to auto sum when you're entering amounts here. I just have to ask that you do not use any special characters such as dollar signs or periods or commas, etc. And then the first line is already filled in with the funds information. All you'll need to add is when the funding is anticipated. For the spring, again, that would be June 2023, and then the amount that this request is for. And then any other sources of funds that you have or are expecting for this specific request. Here, you'll see that it's auto summing, and then we get down to the expenses section. And here, again, it's set to auto sum, and I will go over what this is in a second as well. So here in the expense category, you want to be very detailed, specifically in the notes and explanation section. You want to be able to tell the grant making committee members what specifically the expense is that you are hoping that the proposal or the request pays for. And I do have a sample that I link below the financial information table for applicants to take a look at, and to give you an idea of some of the possible funding sources that you can add in the income section. And then the possible expenses and expense categories with specific notes that you can also think about as you're filling out your own financial information table. There are some hints in red that you can take a look at here. And then this specific one is a sample financial information table for general operating support. And because it's for general operating support, I'm adding my organization's entire organizational budgets. Again, this sheet is available for download here within the application, and you can use that as a resource as you're filling out your own table. And then lastly, down here, this bottom line is set to auto sum and to help verify that your total income and total expenses match. So this total income number should match your total expenses number. And keep in mind that obviously the total amount requested from the fund should not exceed $10,000. So for example, if I'm looking to pay salaries, you know, the notes and the explanation will be more thorough, but the salary that I'm looking to pay is a $70,000 salary, and from the fund I'm asking $5,000 specifically for that salary. So that's that breakdown that you're seeing here. And then down at the bottom, of course, there's the clues that I give again. Include income and expense summaries for the proposed request only. Amount requested from the fund must not exceed $10,000. That's this number here. And then provide detailed notes for each expense category. That's going to be here where you'll want to provide those detailed notes. And then the total income amount in section 1 must match the total expense amount in section 2, and this number will automatically balance out at 0. If it is not matching, for example, if I have extra expenses that are not being covered, then it will not be balancing out, and in fact, it'll be telling me that I'm negative $5,000. And then finally, this is a cash only budget. Do not include any in-kind donations. And then we'll ask if the total income and total expense amounts match and balance out at 0. As long as this number here is balancing out at 0, you can go ahead and select yes and move on. If it is not, it will actually ask you to stop and go back and take a look at why that's not adding up and balancing out at 0. And oftentimes it really is just we added a comma or a period somewhere we weren't supposed to. And then you'll confirm that the total amount requested from the fund does not exceed $10,000 and matches the requested amount of this specific grant proposal. And then we'll ask you to list your top 3 highest budget priorities in priority order. And then we'll ask you for any past funding sources, and here you can share any past funding sources for this specific request. And we're just near the end here. The final part is going to be the additional information. The first part is going to ask for a statement of charitable purpose only if you are applying with unincorporated status. If you are not applying with unincorporated status, let me go back and change that here. You'll see that the additional information section changes, and instead you are being asked to list list all key participants involved in your request. And then we'll ask for a list of the board of directors of your organization. And if you are applying as unincorporated, then you'll give us a list of the governing body of your group. And then if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor, we'll ask for a list of board of directors of the fiscal sponsor. And for tax exempt status, or for tax exempt organizations applying with C3 or C4 status, we'll ask you for the IRS determination letter. There's a sample linked here to give you an idea of which letter it is that we're looking for. And then we'll ask you for a copy of your state of California franchise tax board determination letter. And there's a sample here linked as well. And then if you have an organization logo, we'll ask you to upload that here. And this we use whenever our communications team wants to share more information about the wonderful work that you're doing. And finally, there's an optional attachment section where you are able to upload a document of your choice that helps the grant making committee understand your request or your organization better. And the very last part of the application will ask you to certify the information that you provided in the application. You enter your full name and then the date. And then we'll also ask you to send a request of endorsement to a member of your board of directors if you have C3 or C4 status, a member of the board of directors of the organization acting as a fiscal sponsor if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor. And if not, if you're applying as unincorporated, then you'll send it to a group lead. Once everything is complete, you'll come down here and you'll hit apply, and the application will come through on my end. If at any point you're working through your application and you need to hop off, you can always come down here and hit save draft, and it will save a draft for you. And I think throughout the presentation, you also noticed that it kept saying that a draft was being saved every, I don't know, 15-30 seconds. Again, so that's available for you. And I still encourage folks to work offline for those bigger chunks of text so that your work is not lost.